Hi everybody, welcome to FoundFlix. On this Ending Explained, we'll be looking at the highly anticipated It Chapter 2, where the murderous clown Pennywise returns 27 years after being defeated by the Young Losers Club, and the scattered friends are called back to their hometown for a final confrontation with the evil entity known as It. When it comes to following up the massively successful Chapter 1 and finding a way to properly conclude the It story, Chapter 2 had a lot of ground to cover, and it doesn't quite measure up, especially after the high bar set by Chapter 1. There's a lot that is extremely successful about the sequel, such as the excellent Adult Losers cast. It reads like a fan's dream of casting led by James McAvoy, Jessica Chastain, and Bill Hader, who are all exceptional in their roles. But it's Bill Hader and James Ransone playing his BFF and possibly more Eddie that really steals the show. Both have great charisma and are absolutely hilarious, which actually turns out to be a blessing and a curse. While levity is always appreciated in a dark horror flick, there's a problem of too much humor here. Almost every time there's a big scene or scare, either chime in with a joke that quickly undercuts the horror, and kind of leaves the movie's tone feeling imbalanced overall, because it does really make the whole thing feel a lot less scary as a result. Although amongst the many actual scare sequences are a lot of creative and well done moments, boasting some genuinely terrifying stuff. In particular, the funhouse sequence, a girl getting abducted under the bleachers, a moment with the real man behind the makeup, and the opening scene with the death of Adrian, who if you've read the book, you know all about. These all stand head and shoulders over the rest, and I think it's because they rely most heavily on It in his Pennywise or more human form. As the movie goes on, he takes on more and more monstrous visages, and Pennywise and Bill Skarsgård themselves feel strangely underutilized, opting instead for more big CG monsters and whatnot that simply aren't as frightening to me. It feels the further it gets away from the more human side of things that the fear is also dissipated as well, because as I've said before, CG just doesn't really do it for me in horror movies, made even more glaring when compared to the more human side of things that feel much more real and genuinely frightening, such as the now adult Henry Bowers who busts out of an insane asylum. This guy with a knife attacking our crew is actually scary, more so than a big computer witch or whatever, and it seems that thanks to the filmmakers getting double the budget of the original, they spent all their extra cash on more CG monsters and a grander scope, but lost the heart of things in the process, which is what made the first one so successful. It sort of feels as though the filmmakers buckled under their own intentions. It would be extremely difficult to adapt King's 1,100-page novel into even 2 movies, even though Chapter 2 clocks in at a mind-boggling 3 hours. But the runtime still isn't enough to include everything in a satisfying way, and it still left me wanting more from a quite pedestrian and straightforward sequence of plots. And also considering that much of the movie is made up of a scavenger hunt that each loser goes about on their own that ultimately amounts to nothing, it makes it feel like a lot of the runtime ends up being inconsequential, filling in time with more scares and unnecessary flashbacks with the de-aged kids cast until getting to that inevitable final showdown. So it's definitely a bit of a mess, but there are plenty of flashes of greatness that make it all still an overall worthwhile adaptation. Although once again, the ending proves itself a problem. They go in a slightly different direction than the book and 1990 miniseries, and it just doesn't feel like a satisfying climax for the massive buildup, again relying more on bombastic CG action rather than horror. And in the end, it's kind of just like, oh, that's it? Okay, gotcha. Now there is no way that I can possibly break down the entire movie beat by beat, so I'll be focusing on breaking down the bigger story and important moments. And of course, the Ritual of Chud and how it works this time, along with looking at the ending and comparing it to the 1,000 times more insane and cosmic finale from the book than what we get here. 27 years have passed since the Losers Club initially defeated Pennywise back in 1989. In the time since, the friends have drifted apart and moved on to their own lives. Bill, a successful author and screenwriter, but is notorious for botching his endings, something that has been levied against Stephen King's own books, and the ending of It is no different. Richie is a stand-up comedian. Eddie works in insurance and married an overbearing wife just like his mother. Bev has also married a man exactly like her father who abused her as a child, each showing us that while they have grown up in many ways, they are still unable to escape the shadows of the past and have yet to resolve all of their deep-seated issues. We also know that most likely due to It's influence in their hometown, the further away from from Derry they get and longer they stay away, all of their important childhood memories, as well as their battle with Pennywise, have faded away into the recesses of their minds. Mike is the only one of the group who stayed behind in Derry, and as he stayed in town unlike the others, he never forgot what happened. Now living over the library and obsessed with collecting as much information on it as he can to destroy it in case it ever returns. Which, as we know, Pennywise has a feeding cycle of every 27 years, and it soon becomes obvious that the evil entity has returned. Our opening scene also showing us how the town itself has been poisoned by his presence. At a carnival, a gay couple becomes the target of a bunch of a-holes who brutally assault both, before tossing Adrian over the bridge, trying to stay above the water, and a figure on the river's edge is there to lend him a hand. Pennywise, with his deadlights glowing eerily. He snatches Adrian up, his boyfriend helpless, as Pennywise unleashes hundreds of balloons, obscuring his view, and when the balloons dissipate, Adrian is gone. This is probably the most effective and well done scare sequence in the entire movie. It's a shame that it's the opening scene that is the highlight of the movie, as there is still almost 3 more hours to go. And it never quite gets the balance right after this adaptation of the infamous and one of several controversial scenes from the book. As more children are claimed by it, Mike puts out a call to each of the dispersed Losers Club, and each time they don't even remember Mike at all, let alone the many other memories that they shared as kids. Though after a few moments on the phone, a kind of realization dawns upon them as the memories begin to creep back in. Richie uncontrollably vomiting and unable to go on stage and perform, causing Eddie to get into a car wreck, and most painful of all, poor Stanley. We know that he was absolutely traumatized by their time in the sewers as children, and well, nearly getting eaten, and the call alone is enough for him to take his own life, completely unable to even attempt to return to Derry after what he went through. The group reunites for the first time in nearly 30 years at the Jade of the Orient restaurant, and after some initial awkwardness, they soon are laughing and reminiscing, the sparks of their childhood friendship starting to come back to life. However, Mike didn't mention the real reason for asking them back, and it makes sure he knows they're back, turning the restaurant into a nightmare of eyeball fortune cookies, weird baby scorpion things, and a chorus of children's heads singing in a fish tank. Everyone feels a bit betrayed by Mike hiding his real intentions, and each member isn't really interested in his plan to defeat Pennywise, and simply want to leave and go back to their lives. Though perhaps out of obligation for their blood oath, they decide to stick around for now. And it's Bill who learns about Mike's specific plan to destroy it. Spiking his water with an herb, Bill experiences a drug trip that illuminates its past, first seen crashing as a meteor thousands of years ago in the area. Mike explains that he learned how to defeat it from a group of local natives, the Shopokawaya tribe. Utilizing their Ritual of Chud, the tribe learned of it being in the area, and wisely elected to move beyond where it could attack them, but still attempted to use the ritual to destroy it. And Mike is hoping they can try the ritual for themselves to end it. Even though if the tribe did try it before, it obviously didn't work since it is still around. I'm sure that won't matter though. The key to performing the ritual is using a tribal artifact that Mike stole from the tribe, and each Losers Club member must confront their past to acquire a token that symbolizes some of their deep-seated and unresolved childhood trauma, each also encountering Pennywise in some form each time. Once they collect their tokens, they can attempt to face it again. For Bill, it's related to his poor brother Georgie's death, which he still feels responsible for in a way, encountering it as Georgie in the same sewer drain where he was taken, and he's able to snag his boat, the SS Georgie. Richie visits the local abandoned theater, remembering an encounter there with the bully Henry Bowers, taking a literal token from the Street Fighter arcade machine that he loved so, and also has a memory of the gaudy Paul Bunyan statue coming to life in the town square and attacking him, whereas now Pennywise appears at the top of the statue, telling Richie how happy he is to see him, floating giddily in the air with a bunch of balloons. Pretty weird, but this is it after all, and he's kind of a weirdo by nature. Eddie ventures back to Mr. Keen's pharmacy, there meeting with the leper that terrified him as a child, and manages to stand up for himself this time, still getting black goo vomited into his face. But this is the first indication of Eddie actually not being a scaredy cat, retrieving his inhaler that was one of many placebos his mom had been forcing him to take, and convincing him of just how sick he was. All lies. Ben and Bevs are tied to the schoolyard crush that barely developed in their youths. Bev goes to visit her old childhood apartment, and where her dad was abusive and a terrible person, where now a kindly old lady, Mrs. Kirsch, lives, who is happy to let Bev tour her old place. There in the banister in the wall, she had stowed away the postcard from Ben with the poem about her hair being winter fire, which she seems genuinely affected by, despite not even at this point remembering who it was that actually wrote it to her. And it turns out the kindly old lady ain't so kind after all and is another manifestation of Pennywise, but this time a giant witch that attacks her. And he had even changed the entire reality of the apartment complex where she was. Next up is Ben, who sets out on his own lovelorn journey, who returns to their middle school, remembering a time when he ran into Pennywise there, it actually taking Bev's form, then finding the old yearbook page that Bev was the only one to sign back when they first met. With all their tokens now acquired, they can head into its domain, starting at the Neibolt house, where it takes many forms to try to keep them away, like taking a knife to Ben's stomach just as Henry did in the past, and turning Stanley's head into a spider creature that pops out of the fridge. Nice The Thing reference. Along with revisiting the scary, not scary at all doors from their childhood, eventually making their ways into the sewers below. When they arrive to the location where they first defeated Pennywise, it turns out that this wasn't his actual real home, discovering a porthole that leads even further down below. They're finding the location and debris left behind from when it first arrived on Earth. This explains where he went at the end of the first movie. There was a lot more down below than we had seen before. Using their ceremonial jar thing, they start a fire and each toss in their tokens, as Mike says, having to burn the past and present at once. His token is a still bloodied rock from their fight with Henry and his goons, the first time they all came together as a group and showed how they were stronger together rather than alone, which was instrumental in their first defeat of Pennywise. Also tossing in a shower cap for Stanley, revealed in a flashback that they wore them back in Ben's treehouse. As they continue to chant together, it turns out the Ritual of Chud is a dud, and Pennywise emerges to mock them, as once again Mike didn't reveal the whole truth, showing the group from the first ritual and everyone was killed. The ritual was completely pointless, which winds up making a lot of the movie feel pointless too. Although it is worth acknowledging what Mike was actually hoping to happen, since he of course knew the whole time the ritual wouldn't work. But he was hoping that the power of the group belief in it would be the key to defeating it. Quite importantly, in the '89 fight, Bill turned the bolt gun on the manifestation of his brother. After Pennywise reverts from Georgie to his clown form, Mike knew that it wasn't actually loaded, but all the other kids were just like, shoot it, do it, dude, truly believing together that the bolt gun would work despite what reality dictates. And this is exactly what we see happen. He puts a bolt right between Pennywise's eyes, the key to his defeat being their unified beliefs and lack of fear that defeated him. It was here that Mike first saw the true power of belief and childlike imagination, which is essentially what they remember to do all over again this time. It then shapeshifts into its true form of a giant spider, with the top half made up of Pennywise. He chases them around in a scene that was more like out of an action movie than a horror movie. Sometimes having a bigger budget doesn't actually help things, because this sequence was kind of ridiculous. It's Eddie who is the first to use the power of belief. Back when first entering the house, Beverly handed a terrified Eddie a rod of some kind, calling it a monster killer. He's confused, but she tells him if he believes that's what it is, then it shall be. Psyching himself up, Eddie attacks it with the rod, and it does harm him, but unfortunately he is killed by a massive pointy spider leg through the back. But it's his sacrifice that makes the losers realize what they need to do, again uniting their beliefs to overpower it. As they mentioned, he is forced to change his shape to fit into certain spaces, like shrinking or getting larger to fit through tight spots in the cave. So by this same idea, the losers could force it to change his shape if they believe in themselves enough. Chanting in unison, they yell "clown" at him over and over, their lack of fear causing it to grow weaker and weaker, eventually degrading into a small pile of clown on a rock. They remove his heart and crush it together, and it dissolves away for good this time, its deadlights changing to a green color before disappearing. Afterwards, Ben and Bev get together as everyone else returns to their normal lives. But this time they remember everything that happened, as a cloud of evil around Derry has been vanquished. And their blood oath scars also disappear, showing us that they've been able to finally move on from the past. And they now keep in touch as close friends despite not being in close proximity. And even Mike finally leaves Derry for the first time in his life to explore the world as he has always wanted. So the climax was well well executed and everything, but it still feels like kind of a letdown, proving just how hard it is to really get the ending right, which the movie references many times and seems to be a kind of meta statement on the movie itself, understanding that they were a bit up against the wall in that sense. It is tough to properly and satisfyingly conclude the journey of it and the Losers Club. The 1990 ending was undone by a goofy spider prop, which many, including Tim Curry, admitted made things tough to take seriously. The filmmakers, however, were given no choice, as what they received on set didn't exactly line up with its earlier counterpart, but their only option was to scrap it or forge ahead with what they had. And even the original ending of King's novel leaves something to be desired. Again, after a build-up of 1,100 pages, it is tough to stick the landing. And for King, he goes into an almost fever dream for his climax, taking things into a much more otherworldly and bizarre direction, where the Ritual of Chud is actually pivotal to the final battle. Adult Bill and Richie are faced with its deadlights, which is an energy that originates in another dimension outside of our own, thrusting them into this dimension, the so-called macroverse that pops up in some of King's other works, most notably in the Dark Tower series. The only other known inhabitant of the macroverse is our good friend Maturin the space turtle, who birthed the universe when he had a tummy ache. Maturin acts as kind of the counterpoint to it, being an entity of good, while it, as you might have guessed, is pure evil. And it's Maturin who first teaches a younger Bill about the ritual. It tells him that he must challenge it by overlapping and biting down on each other's tongues to begin a joke-telling contest, and the first to laugh loses. Okay, so that is really freaking weird, but what actually happens is kind of a representation of that, as in the dimension Bill and it have a psychic battle of wills, not literally biting down on its tongue, but the tongue of its mind. This time, as an adult, thanks to an assist from Richie and Eddie, they are able to weaken it enough to physically kill it. So yeah, it's all still pretty out there, and it's obvious why the filmmakers didn't try to adapt this original ending, which also featured in the childhood ritual that infamous orgy scene, which obviously that ain't ever gonna happen ever. While they did change it into a more admittedly simplified and less cosmic form, the intent is still the same, of the group working together to take down it once and for all, thanks to their unified belief in each other. So as we can see, the ending has proven a point of difficulty for every version of it, going all the way back to the insane original and frankly unadaptable ending of the book. So it makes sense that the new version would suffer from the same difficulties, though I do feel adding some of the more bizarre cosmic aspects of the original would have at least made the new ending more memorable. As a whole, I feel as though It Chapter 2 was plagued by the same sorts of issues. They did do a lot right, but also kind of lost themselves in the grander parts of the story, resulting in an overall jumbled mess of things that do work, yet on the flip side, decisions that I feel inhibited the movie from successfully concluding what was set up in Chapter 1. And I feel things would have benefited from being considered as one huge two-movie project from the start, rather than the hodgepodge that we were inevitably given that had difficulty cramming way too much into Chapter 2, even though it is nearly 3 hours long. So even if a letdown in that sense, it also, as I said, would be tough to hit that high mark that Chapter 1 did. And as always happens with sequels, they come with pre-built-in hype and expectations, which unfortunately always makes the follow-up more difficult and always held to a higher standard as well. I still give props to Andy Muschietti and Gary Dauberman, the hardest working man at WB, who did an admirable job at the broader strokes of the story and crafted plenty of great new scares and moments, but they just couldn't quite check all of the many boxes that were needed to really pull the whole thing off. Oh well, I'm heading back to Derry, folks. Haven't been there in a long ass time. You know, honestly, can't even remember why I left in the first place. That's weird. Oh well. Catch you guys later. What did you guys think of It Chapter 2 and its ending? Do you wish they had done something more like the book? Which adult loser was your favorite? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. Thanks for watching FoundFlix. See you next time.